Where did this? There we go. Okay, so everything seems to be working normally. Okay. So thank you for the reminder, Raquel. As a reminder for everyone, we are recording. So that's just a heads up.
Recording in progress.
We're good? Perfect. All right. So we are going to start off with just a few meeting best practices, and then we'll jump into sort of a quick wrap up of where we landed on our legislative concepts, as well as our budget policy option packages. I will note that we've got 20 minutes on the agenda for each of those two items. I do not have 20 minutes of content prepared. The primary function of that will just be to answer any questions and give you all a quick overview of where we're at. So we may not need the full time for that agenda item. And then really the intent for today is to spend a majority of our time getting an update from Director Byler on our 2021 project implementation progress. So for best meeting practices, right now we only have department staff in the room. We may expect a few other folks to trickle in, but I just want to remind folks to raise your hand whenever you're called on, whether you're in person or in Zoom, and we'll try to answer your questions in the order that we see your hands come up. Again, please be patient. We're juggling multiple screens in a hybrid setting, so we're going to do our best. Because we are, some of us are in person, some of us are remote. Please make sure that you state your name and what organization you're representing. I know it's hard to remember sometimes, but please just try to remember to tell us who you are and who you're representing. So you're not just, for us, a nebulous voice coming out of the ceiling. For those of you who are in person, if you can, pull your laptop up, turn your camera on and mute yourself. And we are going to go ahead and get started. Before we jump into things, does anyone have any questions, comments? Is anyone having technical difficulties hearing or seeing anything? We're just joined by Miss Mary Ann Cooper. So we actually have someone else in the room with us. Fabulous. So Miriam, when you get settled, if you want, and you brought your laptop, it'd be great if you could turn your laptop on and just mute yourself so people can see your face as well.
Yep, I can do that.
Fabulous, thank you. All right, so we are going to go ahead and jump into an update on our legislative concepts in terms of where we're at. So as a reminder for folks, we have 4 legislative concepts that have been submitted for drafting. The first one is on water planning. So we have updated the original version of the water planning legislative concept that was submitted to Legislative Council for drafting in early June. So that has been circulated via meeting materials. It is also posted to our website. We have updated that legislative concept as a result of a variety of feedback that we received at our May 10th workshop, as well as based on some of the conversations that we have been listening to in the state-supported regional water management and planning work group that has been meeting throughout the year. So we're kind of trying to parallel those conversations and ensure that we are trying to streamline that process and reduce redundancies. So I want to flag that we have a subgroup meeting for folks who have self-selected to participate in sort of a smaller group to really hash out policy on this legislative concept. We're planning to meet the second week of July. If you are not included in that meeting and you would like to be, please reach out to me and I will be sure to add you. I will also flag that we received a variety of questions at that meeting, and we are working on responding to all of those questions in writing, and we'll be trying to circulate our responses to those questions as soon as possible, and we will have those to you all before that subgroup meeting the second week of July. For our split season leasing legislative concept, we submitted the draft version for that legislative concept as it was originally drafted. So that one has really not changed very much. We've had 2 smaller subgroup meetings on that concept, and we have really been focused heavily on answering questions about the program and kind of having more in-depth conversation about the program and what it does and what it means for split season leasing. We have 2 other sort of work group placeholder bills on the transfers of stored water and department fees. So as a reminder for some folks, those are 2 work groups that were legislatively, basically we received funding to convene 2 work groups on transfers of stored water and on department fees. We have submitted legislative language that basically says the department will study transfers of stored water or study department fees. The intent is not to do studies. The intent is to essentially have those concepts and ultimately bills serve as potential vehicles should those 2 work groups come to a legislative solution in time for session. So for both of these concepts, scoping and work on those were a little bit delayed by the 2022 legislative session, so we have not yet really gotten those off the ground. I will say, however, that we are working on meeting with potential facilitators to essentially identify a facilitator, starting to draft work plans, scope the project out, and hopefully get those work groups moving at some point this year and into 2023. So with that, and again, I did not go in depth in policy. We have our subgroups for that. So if you have specific policy questions, we can try to get those answered. But if you have specific policy questions and comments, those are likely best served for subgroup discussions. But does anyone have, before we move on to budget, does anyone have any questions, comments about policy option, or excuse me, about legislative concepts at this point in time? As a reminder, raise your hand if you have anything. Mary Ann in person, if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand.
I do have a question. It's probably more process related.
Go for it.
For the transfers of stored water work group, because I don't think you have yet, are you all thinking there'll be rules on the actual concept that passed and then the work group, or vice versa?
So
because you still have to do rules on the concept, right?
Yeah, for the work group, we are currently looking at it from a legislation standpoint.
Okay.
Certainly, if we think it would be beneficial to talk about the rules, we could incorporate that into our schedule. But our first priority will be the legislation.
Okay.
Great. All right. Any other questions? I'll just pause for a little bit longer to see if folks have any other questions. One thing I will also note, and this is just more of a background process, we already mentioned this earlier on, but it's worth mentioning again. So we submitted all of our LCs for drafting early June. We are planning to receive those drafts from Legislative Council anytime between now and September. At that point, we will have 2 weeks from the date that we received the draft to submit another round of revisions based on the conversations that we are going to continue having with folks on all of the LCs. So just, I wanted to flag that for folks that if you are involved in some of these more in-depth subgroup policy discussions, you may receive a message saying we've got 2 weeks to get new language in. So that's kind of how it's going to go down. Jeff, thank you for wearing a mask.
Yeah, safety first. So with the the concept on transfers, can you help refresh my memory on to what extent that legislation goes? Does it refute, for example, the Attorney General's opinion on transfers?
The LC right now just asked Jeff the department to facilitate and convene stakeholders to find a path forward and establish criteria for transferring the point of diversion and location of stored water. So it's pretty vague at this point. So just those two pieces, and then establishing criteria around those. Great. All right. So let's move on to budget. If there are no other questions on legislative concepts. So we also circulated, along with the legislative concept language, the final prioritization of the legislative concepts, or excuse me, the policy option packages that we have been working on with all of you. So first, I want to say thank you to everyone for your comments and input throughout the year. I know this has been a really large lift for all of you. And I know it was a lot of information to sift through, so really appreciate your engagement with the material. So we considered a variety of feedback from the commission, as well as all of you, to essentially get to where we are. I also want to take a step back and kind of provide a little bit of an overview as to basically how we got to this final list of prioritized POPs. So initially, when we started scoping out the budget, we looked to the integrated water resources strategy, as well as the department's strategic plan, to identify gaps and then work forward from there within the agency to propose the variety of POPs that we started with. At that point, we began to engage with you all, engage with our commission to gather input on your priorities and where you all felt the best use of time and money were going to be with the department. So after the last 6 months of engagement with you all, we ended up with that final POP list, and we essentially sought the opportunity to combine some of the POPs during that prioritization process and ultimately reduce the number of packages. And we also had a really kind of a standard sort of prioritization method that we used in general. So first, we really tried to address the needs of existing programs and continuing commitments. We call this finishing the job. So this includes things like continuing existing positions, existing funding opportunities, carrying over unspent funds, and shoring up gaps in sections that provide foundational service to the entire agency. So these are things, these are things like IT, accounting, HR, things like that. We then prioritized fixing holes in items. So these are things that, should they be left unfunded, we wouldn't need to.
Oh, I'm just listening.
Out of other pots.
I'm not
Hey,
actively
excuse me, somebody
participating.
needs to mute, please.
Yeah. Thanks, Annette. So we're trying to plug holes and essentially fund things that would normally need to be paid for out of other pots at the agency should they be left unfunded. Additionally, newer projects ranked lower. So this kind of plays in with the finishing the job. So we prioritized the projects that we were already working on. Newer projects, while important, were ranked lower. Additionally, we ensured that equity was kind of seen throughout our POPs and specifically in a few POPs in particular. So it's very important to the agency, and we know that some POPs were being advocated for to be pushed higher, but as an agency, we wanted to make sure that centering equity continued to be a priority at the department. And lastly, packages that benefited the state as a whole were ranked higher than packages that were region specific, with the intent of and kind of the thought process that statewide packages serve more Oregonians, while also recognizing that local basins often have the opportunity to work with their specific legislators on specific asks, but we also recognize that there are some important local issues that deserve a spot in the agency budget. So we tried to balance those two things as well, all with the overall understanding that this criteria is not exact, We also weighed and considered feedback and priorities from you all throughout this entire process, as well as from our commission. And I also just want to flag and remind folks that only high priority and important items have been included in our budget asks. So all of these POPs are really important to the agency. And if we could rank them all as our #1 POP, we probably would, but we can't. So we have to rank them for the budget purposes, and we have to propose everything that we think is important. So I just want to remind folks that the agency request budget essentially provides a menu of options for the governor. And as a reminder, we will have a new governor come the 2023 legislative session, as well as the legislature to choose from. And the most important part of the process is that we include a variety of POPs in the ARB so that stakeholders, the governor, and the legislature have a broader understanding of department needs across the board. So I want to flag, I'm not going to go through the spreadsheet that lists out every single POP and sort of what we did and go through every single change. I will flag that spreadsheet that I sent out to you all actually does have a column that in a high level explains all the changes that have been made to each POP, including what was lumped, what positions have been removed, and what positions have been added. But I just want to flag a few large changes for you all. And also, I just also want to note that the final pricing within that table is not reflective of the changes that have been made. We are still working on finalizing that pricing. So I just want to divert your eyes away from those numbers if significant changes have been made to certain POPs, and just letting you know that this is a draft. So just a few points that I want to flag. POP 102 is a combination of a variety of packages that support agency-wide foundational work. So this is the finishing the job and sort of fixing holes. So we are trying to support a lot of those foundational departments or sections of the agency that really support the success of the agency as a whole. So these are things like accounting, auditing functions, HR, things like that. We also heard from both a variety of stakeholders as well as our commission that our climate POP, which is POP 109 now, was really important and should be retired. So we actually moved that POP up in terms of where it fell on our prioritization list. I will also flag that there were 2 separate POPs, one for policy support as well as a project management POP. And I want to flag that we actually ended up dissolving those positions and then integrating those positions and responsibilities throughout other POPs. If you look through that table, you'll be able to kind of trace them up and see. But we essentially heard a variety of feedback from you all that we didn't want specific staff members focused at project management. So what we did is we kind of repurposed those responsibilities, integrated those into other policy support positions, as well as program analyst positions strategically placed throughout the agency. And then one other change I want to make that that folks might have seen on POP 111, which is our essentially our water availability POP. So the Snowtel cost share has been removed since we have since learned that it is actually not a cooperative agreement program. And the real solution that we have learned is that there actually needs to be an increase in NRCS federal budget funding at this point in time for that work to continue. So that is why you see the Snowtel work removed. I also want to flag that you'll see that OpenET has also received some revisions on this. So this is a result of the fact that the OpenET funding that was received in December of 2021 special session was actually not removed from the department budget during the most recent emergency board meeting. So that funding essentially will remain in our base budget, which means that we don't actually need to ask for it this budget cycle around. I want to flag that we as an agency understand that there needs to be more conversations with all of you on OpenET as a tool more broadly in its use across the state. So I just want to flag that we are aware of that and that we are committed to working through that and pursuing those conversations that we have been engaging with over the last several months. So with that, I will take a pause. I'll see if any agency staff would like to add anything, and then I'll open the floor for any questions or comments. All right, Annette. And then
Thank you,
please
Bryn.
remember to introduce yourself and what part of the agency you're with.
I appreciate that. Good morning. I'm Annette Liba. I started as the Technical Services Division Administrator on June 1st here at the department. And I just wanted to further describe the plans around OpenET, since Bryn was just talking about it. So the work plan right now, we'll be circling back with stakeholders in the very near future. The work plan right now calls for establishing a technical advisory committee to ground truth data and talk about how to use the data, but that advisory committee is scheduled for next biennium. So I just wanted to add some to Bryn's comment there.
Thank you, Annette. Any other questions, comments on budget? And again, please remember to raise your hand, and I'm going to do my best to call on folks on the phone. I haven't remembered to do that. Does anyone on the phone have any comments or questions that they'd like to add? I see one number. No? All right. I see Miss Peggy Lynch's hand now.
Good morning, everybody. Peggy Lynch, League of Women Voters of Oregon. I want to follow up on Annette's comment. So what I thought I heard was, although you have the money to do OpenET this biennium, you are really postponing work on how to use it, et cetera, until 2023. So the money that is in your current budget on OpenET will sort of sit there.
Thank you for that question, Peggy. This is Annette. The money won't sit there. It will be used as match to continue development of OpenET. Some of what we want to finish is the evapotranspiration work that is called for in House Bill 2018 prior to initiating the Technical Advisory Committee and the conversation about how that data will be used in department programs.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peggy. All right. Looks like we've got Ken and then Mary Ann.
Yes, my question is, I'm having trouble locating the follow-up for the CREP program in the next biennium for the Harney Basin.
Yes, Ken, that is in top 113 on page 7.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes. Mary Ann.
Yeah, and I have one that might be a bit of a response to Peggy, but then I had an actual totally separate question on PUP 109. So in response to Peggy, and because I hope I'm explaining this right, and I feel like I didn't catch it in what you were explaining, there was the money that went toward kind of development of the OpenET tool and its use for water budgeting and stuff like that. That was one pot of money. And then in the special session, you all had gotten money related to marijuana enforcement, where you were proposing to use OpenET as an enforcement tool. And that's the pot that's paused. The actual development of the tool for water budgets, et cetera, is still moving forward. And it sounds like you're moving the money that was meant for enforcement kind of just into the general tool development. Am I explaining this right? Because from Peggy's question, I got the sense she was worried that we were pausing like the entirety of OpenET, and I feel like it was just that one like use of OpenET for enforcement that was the kind of controversial piece.
This is Annette, and Mary Ann, your understanding is correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Saw Rachel's hand go up. I don't know if Rachel was going to say the same thing as Annette. But yeah, and also just a little bit more background. So that 2018, the House Bill 2018 was for historical data as well. And then the new funding that was authorized was basically for like collection of the data moving forward.
Okay,
So that's kind of the distinction between those two pieces of funding, but yeah, and
okay.
that also confirmed.
And then my comment on Pop 109, I apologize because I probably should have mentioned this like 5 meetings ago. But just in reading that one, I feel like there's a missed opportunity on some drought resiliency around agriculture, at least in the description as I read it. Because I feel like there's kind of improving in stream, working with cities, districts, and others to promote water conservation, which is great. And then maybe I'm reading it too narrowly, but the identifying potentially vulnerable systems and working with the systems to improve resiliency to water scarcity and drought. When I hear systems, I feel like I hear like community drinking water systems, and I think there's a broader, like all systems with that, because we're seeing a huge issue in agriculture of like needing to obviously increase drought resiliency and access to water during droughts, so we cannot have food scarcity issues here and abroad. So I just think there's a real, if that is intended systems as in drinking water systems, I think there's a real opportunity to broaden that out and include agricultural systems. And maybe it is broad, and I just think systems as drinking water systems, and that might be me, but.
This is Tom Byler. I don't think it was our intent to be narrow.
Okay.
That we wanted to be as inclusive as possible, especially with agriculture, given how what a big portion of water use they have. So our intent was to look at this as a broad landscape of opportunity with the water user community.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for flagging.
My mask is water, so I'm switching out.
All right, any other questions, comments on budget? Great. Okay, so I will flag for everyone that I believe between now and August 1st, we will be working on the agency request budget. So we're going to be working on refining our POP narratives, refining the POPs, getting our pricing all set up. And we will be working from now furiously until August 1st to get that popped out. So please be on the lookout. With that, I am going to hand things over to Director Filer, who is going to be giving sort of the remainder of the meeting. I know we've slated 3 hours for this meeting. We may not need our full 3 hours, but it's depending on how many questions you all have. So Director Byler is going to give an update sort of on our new workload and where we're at in spending funds and implementing projects that were given to the agency during the 2021 legislative session.
Thanks, Bryn. Before I go into that, I just want to thank Bryn and Raquel and Lisa and a number of folks who have, and our staff who have been working towards building these legislative concepts and these budget requests. But I also want to thank everyone who's participated in these meetings over the past few months. We've approached this a little bit differently and a little more intensively than we have in the past. But we are very open to hearing your feedback on how we can improve our outreach going forward. So if you have any thoughts, feel free to leave them in the chat or send an email to me or Bryn or Raquel, and just let us know if there are different things that we could be doing to help have these conversations be as meaningful as possible. We sure appreciate your feedback along the way. It's very helpful for us to know what's on your mind, what's important to you, what your priorities are. So thanks for that. For the project implementation update, for those of you who have sat in on recent legislative hearings or commission meetings, this may sound a little familiar, but the opportunity here, I'm going to go through a brief update on project implementation, but we have a bunch of staff here who are either in the room or online in this meeting who are connected to the different projects that we have in the bigger cube. I don't know, Bryn, if we sent out the project list as part of the materials. So you have the most up-to-date, I think it was June 24th. So it's the most up-to-date list that we have. Please take a look at that. This is an opportunity for you if you have any questions about specific projects. After I get through my spiel, there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions about the status of any projects or any questions you have related to the workload that we have. So I'll try to make my remarks pretty brief, and then we'll open it up for questions and see what time we want to take for that. In terms of my remarks, I'm going to have kind of 3 areas of focus. One is just a very high level review of the workload that we have as a result of the 2021 legislative activities. I'm then going to focus a little bit more on updating around our recruitment process and around highlighting some project implementation issues, both our successes and our challenges. And then lastly, I'll talk a little bit about how we track our progress, how we're organizing ourselves around this effort and the communication related to that. So first off, in terms of the workload, the long session in 2021 and the second special session in December of 2021 provided a unique and extraordinary investment in our agency in one fell swoop, or 2 fell swoops, I guess, technically, where we through these investments had over 40 new projects put on our plates with either new programs or adding resources for existing programs, 38 new positions in the long session. And then, of course, drought and cannabis were the topics in the special session in December, and added another 32 new positions. That's an extraordinary increase for this agency. And, you know, for those of you who've been around our agency for a number of years, from my perspective, you know, you might have seen in a good biennium for us in terms of growth, maybe we would get 10 or 15 new positions, not 70. So this is a very big increase for our agency. We're excited about it, but the workload also, we might have coming out of a legislative session, have, you know, some new programs, a handful of new programs and added expectations associated with our new budget. But this is really, again, just extraordinary new territory for us as an agency. It's been transformative for us in terms of how we approach our business, how we're organizing ourselves, and frankly, how we're spending our time. So let's go to the next slide, please. Just this is a bar graph that shows some of the increases. This is kind of on paper how things look in terms of the 2021 investments. I wouldn't get too detailed on this because we've made some administrative changes that will actually shift this around. But really what I want to demonstrate here is make really 2 points. One is a very significant increase in our field services and technical services division work. A lot of data, groundwater, surface water, data collection and analysis associated with this, and of boots on the ground in terms of assistant water masters, and folks who help us get our work done out in the field. Notably here, we actually have a decrease in our capacity in our water rights services division. And so I just want to make that remark as well, which of course is an important area of services for us to deliver to Oregonians. All right, go to the next slide, please.
Oh, looks like Mark has a question really quickly.
Oh yeah, Mark, go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. Sorry, Mark Landauer, Special Districts Association. Tom, on the Water Rights Service Division, could you describe to everybody why you're seeing a decrease in that sector? If my memory is that in 2021, we had the fee discussion, and even with a fee increase, if my memory serves me correctly, you folks were looking at as many as 8 people being, or maybe it was 6 people being, the department being reduced, even with the fee increase. My recollection was that we tried to move some ARPA money in to sort of fill the gap and have a work group talking about fees. Could you perhaps describe why you're seeing a reduction in the Water Rights Service Division, please? Thank you.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks for that reminder of some of the history around that. I'll try to describe the situation in general terms. and you kind of covered, you hinted at it with your remarks. We have had for a number of years a kind of a formula that we've worked on through in combination with working with interested stakeholders and folks who are interested in our budget around a kind of a shared approach of a 50% of funding some of the services within our water rights services division with 50% general fund, 50% fees. And we've had a formula that we've been using for the calculation of our fees, and we've been on a pattern of updating that every 4 years. We went through that process thinking that things were kind of business as usual as we developed our legislative concept for a fee increase for 2021. Late in the game, we discovered that there were some fundamental flaws in our formula that was causing us to lose ground in terms of meeting our increasing expenses. In other words, we weren't keeping up with expenses. And when you combine the fee revenues not really meeting our cost of living over time with some of the challenges that we've had traditionally with general fund, and especially under a constrained revenue environment with the state economy, that creates a real strain within our water rights services division. We went into, during, I should say, the 2019-2021 biennium, we had significant cutbacks in that division. We held a lot of positions open because of lack of general fund. You may recall there was a 10% cut in 2020, in the August of 2020, as a result of the economic downturn that was happening in the early months of COVID. And so we had real concerns and problems with our water rights services division and our ability to be able to continue capacity. As soon as we understood the gravity of the situation, we began to have conversations with stakeholders and the legislature around how we can right the ship. And that led to this package, or what Mark referred to, were the legislative investment in ARPA dollars, and I think a little bit of general fund dollars. I can't remember off the top of my head, but mostly ARPA dollars to do two things. One was to provide some resources for temporary hires and capacity for us to start chipping away at some of the backlogs that we have in our water rights related programs, transfers, permits, certificates, etc. And the other element was some funding to help us form a work group to take a look at our fee-based programs and how we can put a better, have a better approach so that we're able to cover our expenses more adequately and consistently over time. I'll talk about these things a little bit later, or maybe I'll just close the loop on this now. One thing to bear in mind is that we have not started those efforts, in part because it took a very long time for us to learn about the viability and whether we can even use the ARPA dollars for these purposes. But we just got the green light from the feds and the state this spring. And so we're starting to move on those issues now, but we've had a big delay on our ability to be able to get that work done because of the having to wait for confirmation that the ARPA dollars were could be used for these purposes. Hope that answered your question, Mark. Let's keep going then.
Yeah, I just make a quick comment. Thank you. This remains an obvious area of concern. Ensuring that we have the adequate staff to process certificates, transfers, et cetera, so I just want to be sure that we're keeping our eyeballs on this one. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark.
Looks like Peggy also has a question.
I'm sorry, Peggy Lynch, League of Women Voters. I have to follow up on this to understand. So now that you have the use of the ARPA dollars, which by the way are spendable until the end of 2024, I assume that this is a part of one of the POPs, and that will you be able to do any hiring between now and the end of this biennium on the Water Rights Services Division?
Thanks, Peggy. This is Tom Byler again. So we do have an option package that would continue these dollars and actually I think it requests some general fund dollars for us to be able to continue beyond in the full biennium, next biennium, around the backlog reduction work. But the ARPA dollars will get us halfway, I think roughly halfway through the biennium. And so we are contemplating be able to continue that, finish the job mode for water rights. And I know that, and I see Dwight's got his hand up, so he'll be able to correct anything that I say that is off base, but this was one of our highest priorities last fall when we came out of the 21 session, the long session. But again, because of the delay of the eligibility of the ARPA dollars, we had to hold back. Since that time, since we've been given the green light, Dwight has made it a priority for us to recruit and positions that can help us do this work. And so it's our intention to bring people in so that we can start that work this biennium and get moving on it with the hope that we'd be able to continue those resources going into next biennium. Dwight, do you want to add anything?
Thanks, Tom. Just real quick, Dwight French, Water Right Division, Water Right Services Division Administrator. And yeah, we're actively recruiting right now for 8 caseworkers to work on certificates, transfers, and water rights. And we've got interview questions ready, training plans ready. My existing staff are excited to have some new folks on board. We've already hired one support person to start to get trained. He's starting to get trained up to support this increased workload that's coming. So anyway, we're actively recruiting, and over the next probably 20 to 60 days, fingers crossed, I'll have 8 additional caseworkers in my division. So thanks, Tom.
So thank you. I want to follow up on this. So will this chart change or is this chart reflective of the recruiting you're doing?
Well, I think this chart, this is the first time I've seen it, reflects our permanently budgeted positions. We got this money, but we did not get specific position authority. So we're hiring limited duration folks. And so I think that's what's reflected here. I think Tom touched on it. We hired 2 positions to help us in the protest backlog. That was the same, we got some general fund money for that, but no position authority. So we did hire some people. We're making some good progress. Many of you have heard updates about that in the past.
Thanks, Dwight. Dwight's correct that this bar graph reflects the budgeted positions, and we have made a number of administrative decisions to help us advance the work that we need to do, including, as Dwight was mentioning, the ARPA dollars to help us with the backlogs did not come with any limitation or authority for positions. So we're doing that administratively. We have the dollars. So we are, I guess what I would let folks know is that we do have another document that we can make available to folks that just have an org chart that I think is probably more reflective of our current reality around how we're organizing ourselves from the standpoint of positions and where they sit within the 5 divisions that we have within the agency. So if folks are interested in that, we can make sure that we get that circulated to folks.
Tom, I've already circulated that
Okay,
about
great.
a month ago, I think.
Okay, so you to the same group.
Yes.
Okay, so you can check your emails from Raquel. You'll have I think the latest update to the organizational chart, which will give you a better flavor of how things are, how our different divisions are constructed with the 2021 budget.
I'd like to follow up really quickly since Dwight brought up the limited duration positions. One of the things I just learned with the ODF budget discussion is the amount of limited duration positions that they have. And like you, they are looking at first continuing what we got in 2021 and 2022. It would be helpful at some point to understand, because I know limited duration positions have to be in POPs. And when you give these dramatic numbers about what positions you got and so on, it's helpful to know if they were permanent or LDs to give us a better idea of what we really need to have in those POPs to make sure that you're continued to do the whole that we worked on so hard in 21 and 22.
Thanks, Peggy. I get that, and we'll circle the wagons and figure out a way to convey that information effectively. Okay, thank you all for the questions. Let's go to the next slide, please. So one of the things that we learned right out of the chute in light of the big investment that we had in our programs is that we knew that we had a massive lift in terms of recruitments, really extraordinary for us, unique in scale and its scope. And we've made recruitments really the prime directive, the most important element of our work for this biennium. One of the realizations that we had is that we had the bounty of this budget is fantastic, and I don't want to sound like I'm complaining because I'm not, but it does create a burden on our managers, particularly our section managers, who are in large part have a lot of responsibility for moving a lot of these new programmatic investments, this new workload forward. But they also are the people who are on the point to recruit the staff needed to help provide the capacity to do that work. And we early on made the decision that our highest priority was to get these positions filled so that we could fire on all engines as well as possible and as effectively as possible. But we also knew that it would take time. And we immediately realized that we needed additional HR capacity to be able to help with recruiting. Our agency was not built to hire 70 plus new positions, let alone the vacant positions, the many vacant positions that we had at the beginning of the biennium, because we were under significant budget constraints in 2019-2021 biennium. So we had a very important decision to make right out of the chute that we needed to focus on recruitments, and that again has been a primary focus for us. We are making, I think, great progress. I'm proud of the work that our HR folks and our managers have done in terms of doing recruitments, bringing people in, onboarding those staff. It's been an extraordinary experience for us, both in terms of the scope and the scale, but also because it's been done in this virtual environment that we're in. And these numbers that you see here are actually slightly, they've changed. This was, we've had some updates that I'll mention. As of, I think today, we have 78 positions that have been filled and 63 remaining to be filled. So we're, incrementally making progress. We have, of course, doing this work, and I think this has been an issue that's been shared by other state agencies as well as other organizations across the board. It's a really fluid job market right now, and recruitments I'd say we've been pretty successful with our recruitments, but we do have failed recruitments now and then, depending on the type of position that we're recruiting for, which sometimes can be a relatively unique skill set that we may be looking to fill, or depending on the area of where we're recruiting. Sometimes it's hard to get good candidates, depending on where they may be located. But overall, I think that we've done pretty well. But I know our agency, as well as other agencies, have had some failures along the way. It's taken longer to fill some spots that we wanted to have happen. The other thing I would mention is that it is it's a great time to be an employee and look for other opportunities. And we have had we've had people leave the agency for other opportunities. I know other agencies have struggled with that. Again, it's just part of the job market that we have today. So I would also mention, and this is a good thing, but it does create a bit of a conundrum for us. We've had a lot of folks, and you see here 23 vacancies have been created from filling positions. In other words, we've had internal existing staff move into new positions that we've been recruiting for under this new budget. And that's really great. Quite frankly, it's allowing our existing staff to move on to new opportunities and fulfill some of their career goals. It also gives us staff into these new positions that are already seasoned. They've already have experience with our agency. And that's been a really good thing for us and healthy for any organization to be able to have that mobility within. But it has, on the other hand, created new vacancies for us. And so it's one step forward and one step back from the bigger picture in terms of the recruitments that we have. Again, it's an issue, but it is just one of those things. So we can move to the next slide, please. So in terms of the project implementation, again, you have in your materials the list of all the projects. I'm not going to step through all of those. If you have questions about them along the way, we will take time today to respond to any specific questions. But it is a range of different work, I guess. We have new programs, we have data development work that we've been charged with. We have work groups, a number of different work groups, task forces, and rulemakings that are kind of queued up as a result of the budget and the new workload that we have in front of us. Again, recruitments is job number one for us, but we're, as you can see, if you refer to the project list, we are moving on a number of projects, and I'll talk more about kind of how we organize ourselves around that. But first, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we prioritized our work, and then I'm going to give some examples of some of the successes and challenges that we have with specific projects. I'll be pretty brief about that. In terms of prioritization, there's a number of criteria that we look at, and it's as any of you who go through any kind of prioritization associated with the organization you work in, there are very few straight lines. There are a lot of curving lines and gray areas, but you have to have some criteria. Things that we looked at as we started to think about what did we need to act on most immediately. Some of the things that we would think about would be, was this a one-time investment? Is there a specific deadline identified by the legislature around the resources that we were given? Those things that we knew that we had to act on and act on quickly. And I'll talk about a couple of those as examples of some of the areas where we're making good progress and other areas where we haven't been able to do as much. We also looked at how we would look at the duration of some of the projects in terms of knowing that some projects are multi-biennial just by their nature. Some of the data development projects are such. And so we knew we were on a more of a marathon course than a sprint. We knew that some projects, well, I guess the last thing I'll mention is that while we look at prioritization, we also looked at being opportunistic. And so as we would develop our priorities and what we wanted to move on more quickly, sometimes there would be obstacles that would come up and we wouldn't be able to move as quickly on a project as we had hoped. That created opportunities for second tier projects to move up and advance. And we would take advantage of that in terms of recruitments and project work. And so it is a, like anything, like life itself, it's a bit messy, but there are these kind of trade-offs and considerations that we've had as we've worked through implementing this work. I would mention that we've been meeting on these issues since the summer, and our executive team has been meeting, I guess, through well into the new calendar year. We were meeting twice a week on these issues and really examining it very closely. So it's a lot of effort has gone into how to prioritize and how to make adjustments along the way. Go to the next slide, please. So I want to give some examples of some of the work that we've been able to carry out. And again, this is just a short sample, and the longer list is there. And if you have questions about specific projects, we'd love to hear from you today. One of the areas that was very high priority was our protest backlog. This is one-time funding. It was, you may recall that we had, I guess, about 120 protests pending at the beginning of the biennium. And over time, over probably the past 10 plus years, we really haven't had sufficient resources to be able to put a dent in that queue, in large part because of our additional costs that we've had around litigation, the Klamath Basin in particular, which drives about half of our legal budget itself, and just in that from activities in that basin. And so as a result, we've only been able to manage maybe 2 or 3 contested cases, at any given biennium. The legislature brought forward some money that allowed us to be much more aggressive in terms of tackling that queue. And to date, we've referred 30 cases to the Office of Administrative Hearings. That has been, I think, it has kind of created a bit of a smelling salts moment for some of the participants and protesters in those cases. And we've been able to have 11 protests withdrawn during that time. I think, and Dwight, correct me if I get this wrong, but I think 3 were withdrawn by the protestant after they were referred, and the remainder were settled through negotiations. Our desire, quite frankly, and the most cost-effective way for us to be able to go through this backlog of protests is to have these issues settle out, but that takes time. We've hired, over the course of the year, we've hired staff to help us coordinate around protests internally within our agency. Some of the money that the legislature gave us allowed DOJ to bring on additional capacity. And we're going to continue to, we know that we're not going to effectively eliminate our backlog anytime soon. These are expensive endeavors, and some of them can be very complex and take a long time to resolve if they go through the full contested case process. I would also mention that despite the work that we've done to try to move the ball forward, there were well over 100 new protests that got into our queue just this year alone as a result of a suite of in-stream water right applications that ODFW made in the Douglas County area. So we actually, the queue is actually longer than it was when we started as a result of that. Dam safety is another area. This is an area under our strategic plan. One of our big priorities is to modernize our program areas. And in 2019, significant modernization legislation was passed. And we're very excited that the legislature provided, I think, $4 or $5 million, mostly ARPA dollars, to help us with contracts that will help do different analyses associated with the dams that are subject to the jurisdiction under this program, that are going to help us have a better handle on the status of those structures and the potential impacts that those structures may face in today's climate. And so those are moving forward, and we're excited to be able to get the results and better understanding of the lay of the land associated with those structures. We also just stood up our well abandonment repair and replacement fund in this month, I believe, at the beginning of this month, which was a very rapid process. Our staff did a great job of accelerating the work to be able to have this grant program, which helps. It's really focused this year on dry wells and the needs that domestic well owners have associated with drought and fire, and provides resources through grants for them to be able to help address their situation. So that's been a big effort on our part as well. Go to the next slide.
It looks like Kaylin has a question, so let's
Oh yeah, sure.
pause.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Kaylin.
Hi, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. I'm in the car. Thanks, Tom. Thank Director Byler. Two questions. First is, I was curious how many new protests had come out of the in-stream water right application process. And the second question was, how is the department working to prioritize further referrals of contested cases, if that is something that's going to be happening? Thanks.
Thanks, Kaylin. Dwight, you want to handle that?
You bet, Tom. Thank you for the question. So I believe the number of new protests that we received on in-stream water rights was right at 100. We have referred some in-stream cases to the Office of Administrative Hearings, and we are going to be referring some more. I was just talking to my staff in the past earlier this week. There are some more moving over to OAH. So, as we send cases over to OAH, that often sparks an additional round of settlement discussions. Sometimes those result in settlements, sometimes they don't. And so it is, the whole process with OAH is kind of fluid. As Tom mentioned, we've had 11 settle out this biennium, which is really good for just for 1 year. Many of those cases that we settled out were stale, old protests that probably wouldn't have settled out if we hadn't been able to, move towards a hearing. And so we're looking forward to settling a few more in the next 3 or 4 months. We've got our some things in the works. So in terms of prioritizing, we are moving on. We're trying to prioritize older protests ahead of newer ones. It doesn't always work out that way. And we're also prioritizing kind of across the board. We've got many different flavors of protested applications. We got in-stream, transfers, groundwater applications, surface water applications, reservoir applications, and we've got some of each all moving with the Office of Administrative Hearings. One of the pinch points we've had is the Department of Justice. They're, don't have a lot of ability to kind of keep up with us in terms of, supporting this work. So we found a small number of cases that we think we can proceed on our own without Department of Justice help. And so we're looking forward to that. And Department of Justice has not brought on, well, they brought on a new person who is now in the process of leaving, but they've kind of recruited some folks within DOJ that have some excess capacity to help in this regard. So those folks are just coming on board here recently, and that is helping us move forward on some additional cases. So anyway, I hope that information is helpful. And any of you that are interested in more can, contact me outside this meeting if you'd like to talk more about it.
Thanks, Dwight. I really appreciate that detail there. I guess one follow-up question would be, you mentioned that there are some additional in-stream water rights that are going to be referred over to OAH. Are you able to tell us a little bit more about that next batch, and also what sort of coordination that your team is doing with the team over on the applicant side at ODF&W? And I'll go back on mute. Thanks, mute.
Keelan, I'm not at liberty to say which ones are going over because I'm not 100% sure that the protestants have been contacted yet, and I want them to, hear it from us and before. So but it is a group of, it's not the newer Douglas County group. It's some protests that have been, pending since 1996. So, but anyway, we are excited about it, and hopefully within the next, couple weeks, those will be moved over. And got my fingers crossed that we might, be able to settle those. We'll see.
Thanks, Dwight. The second part of the question was, understanding that you haven't been able to, that you're not able to share information, having not made contact yet with the protestant. Can you share a little more about the process for coordinating with the applicant?
Oh, with just the in-stream water right cases?
Yeah, exactly.
ODF&W is the applicant on all of the protested applications that we have. And so we are, talking to them periodically about cases and which ones move over and which ones sometimes get called back. So we're working with them.
Okay. Thanks, Dwight. The context is helpful. I imagine ODF&W has probably the similar perspectives in most of these cases of which ones are well suited to move forward and which ones might need to hold off. But I'm glad to hear that there's coordination happening there. Thanks.
Yeah, you bet.
All right, thanks for the question, Kaylin. Move on to the next slide, please. So just a few more things to mention that just, again, there's a much longer list here, but in terms of work that we're engaged in, the modernization, another modernization element, again, referring to our strategic plan goal to modernize programs. In 2021, the legislature passed significant legislation modernizing our well construction compliance program, House Bill 2145. And we've been doing implementation work since that time. I've been very busy working, our well construction staff have been very busy making the updates, needed updates, the communication with the well driller community, and really setting this program up for its new, more modern approach, which I think will do a better job of tracking and understanding new well construction at a minimum associated with these improvements. And the other two bullets here are a couple of big work groups that we have. Again, we have more that we need to do than this, as you've heard in previous comments, but the Regional Water Planning and Management Work Group has been underway for a few months now and is focused on looking at a number of you who are on the call here today are engaged in that effort. We appreciate your time and commitment to that. That group is looking at really kind of what regional water planning could look like, how the state might support it, and how that plays into action based on plans over time. So it's a real conversation around what kind of system, if you will, of investment the state could make to help communities move forward on planning and then taking action to implement those plans to help them secure their water future over time. And the last bullet here is Tribes State Agency Task Force. One of the kind of byproducts of the Integrated Water Resources Strategy was the 100-year water vision, which many of you are familiar with, which really took some subcomponents of the IWRS and really tried to elevate those and the discussion around those. And that was really around water infrastructure, the need to invest in water infrastructure, both built and natural. And that led to a lot of community outreach and conversation around the state. The 9 federally recognized tribes really, that conversation really resonated with them, and led to a letter to Governor Brown last fall requesting a task force be formed with the 9 federally recognized tribes and state agencies that have water related authorities. We just had our first meeting of that group this month, and where we're sharing information. The most immediate meetings, probably the next 2 meetings in addition to the one we had this month, are educational, where we're learning about the tribe's interests and issues associated with water, and they're hearing from the state agencies about what our responsibilities are associated with water, and then talking about the relationship between sovereign entities, state and the tribes, with respect to government consultation. So I'm not sure where that group where its conversations will lead, but that has started, and we're very appreciative of the tribe's interest in these water issues. We go to the next slide. So let's talk about some of the challenges that we faced. I already mentioned that this top bullet around our water rights programs, the backlog reduction and fee work group. I won't belabor it, but the bottom line is that we were delayed in being able to implement that work because of the uncertainty of whether we could use the ARPA dollars that were set aside by the legislature to help us with that work. Another area where competing priorities has kind of affected us is around the water budget work. This is around, many of you have been very supportive of the department being able to get more resources for us to have better data to help support decision-making around water in communities and basins around the state. Water budget funding was provided in the 2021 budget, which will allow us to do budgets, water budgets for basins across the state over time. It will take some years to develop that work. We've run into things are moving, the wheels are turning. I don't want to make it sound overly dramatic, but I think we've run into some delays because of our key federal partner, the USGS, the Geological Survey, has its own limitations in terms of its capacity, and has been focused on some other areas, including finishing the groundwater study in the Harney Basin and work that we've just started with them in the Walla Walla Basin has limited their ability a little bit. And then our own limitations in being able to move things forward because of some of the priorities that have developed over just the last year. In particular, our commission has made it a high priority for us to, and many of you may be aware of this, to modernize our groundwater allocation policy. And that, so the same staff who would help us set up and move down the path around, many of the same staff who would help us move down the water budget path have been spending a lot of time helping us work to set up what I think will be some conversations that will be happening soon this summer and into the fall with in the more public sphere around what it might look like to modernize our groundwater allocation policy. So just I'm offering that as an example of how our priorities shift a little bit over time and why. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, recruitments continue to be a challenge. The workforce and the market around recruiting and bringing people in is tough. And there are a lot of folks, other agencies and others out there who are also looking to fill positions. So it's a tough environment for us. Go to the next slide. So we're about to the end here, and I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about how we've organized ourselves around this, our budget. And we've really taken to heart to utilize project and portfolio management practices to grapple with this new budget and all of the work associated with it. And so we have a number of different tools that we've began to use and are practicing actively as we go forward. We have these help us with our prioritization when we were looking at all of our recruitments. They help us with our project prioritization, but they also help us get organized around the more specific details associated with things. So at the outset, many of the projects that are on that list, the project list that you see, have charters that we've developed. So we understand, who's the project manager, who's the project sponsor, what staff may be needed to help it move the project down the path, what kinds of timelines and milestones that we're setting for ourselves in terms of moving that project forward. It's fluid, it changes over time, but that gives us the kind of a basis for setting the stage and expectations around the project. Many of the attributes of our charters are reflected in the project list that you see. So you get a sense of kind of what we're trying to do with that. We also have the project list itself, which is a way for us both internally and externally to understand the breadth and scale of the work that we have in front of us. That project list is again helpful for us internally. It is a basis for us to be able to understand where we're at. We ask our managers to update that list regularly. I think once a month is kind of what our expectations are around that, so that we can get a sense of where things are headed. We've had, really appreciate the feedback that we've received from many of you over time as we've been implementing this, because it's important to us that there's an external understanding. Not that you need to know every whisker of every detail associated with these projects, but so that you do have a sense of what we're working on, and probably most importantly, areas where we're not making as much progress, so that you understand why we're not able to act on things as quickly as we hoped. And along those lines, you've given us really good feedback on how to shape that project list more effectively. And one of the areas that you'll see in that list that's relatively new is a stage and status element. I think this is going to be in the next slide, so I'm going to get ahead of myself a little bit, but you'll see it in that sheet that lists it is kind of more of a dashboard approach. And so this is our early trial around trying to have some more dashboardy type of indicators in the project list. This is an evolving area for us. We look forward to your continued feedback so that we can produce communication materials that are useful for you to give you a sense of our progress and status of different projects. The other thing I'll mention on the slide that we have here is the document on the right-hand side. We have also developed documents that are kind of at a section level, and sections tend to be management units that we have that underlie our divisions. So we have Water Rights Services Division, Technical Services Division, Field Services Division. Those divisions have subunits that are managed by our management staff, and they have specific program responsibilities. We have began to develop section oriented documents that kind of do three things. One, they describe the responsibilities, the programmatic responsibilities within those sections. Then they talk about and articulate what the priorities are, what they're working on that for this biennium. And third, and perhaps just as importantly, they talk about what they're not doing this biennium. This is a work in progress for us. We have a number of sections where we have developed that information. They'll always be in draft form because that's always going to be a bit of a moving target, and we're always going to be a bit of adaptive around this. But I want you to be familiar or understand that that's another tool that we've been using to help us. And I also wanted to let you know that it's our intention to add those documents to the webpage, our project implementation webpage. I don't have a specific date when we'll have those added, but we think that those are important for you to understand. We think they'll be helpful for you to understand the workload associated with the different sections within the agency. And we will get those uploaded onto the website in the coming weeks. Of course, you know, the IWRS and the strategic plan I've mentioned before, and those are guiding documents for us in all the work that we do, whether it's budget development for our ARB or helping us as a compass for guiding the efforts around these implementation of the work that we have. We go to the next slide. I guess I've already kind of gone through this in terms of the document list. I guess my last comment though around our work is that we're learning a lot as an agency as we stretch ourselves and as we grow. And one thing that I'll emphasize with you all is that one of the things that we're learning is that sometimes you head down a path and you run into a dead end and you need to turn around and find a different path. And that is just part of doing business, but it is something that we understand, and we are practicing adaptive management. And so I would ask you to be patient with us as we go forward, because we will make mistakes. We won't be perfect at every twist and turn along the path that we're on. But I want to emphasize with you that we are committed to do the best we can going forward. And part of what helps us be successful is these types of conversations, and your input is really helpful to us. And it's been helpful to us already down this path, but we just encourage you to ask questions, help us understand how we can help you understand the issues. And I think that will help us to do a better job as we go forward. And if we go to I think the last slide.
Tom, before we move off of this one real quick,
Yeah.
One thing that I'll note for folks is I think I shared out on the projects tracking spreadsheet last month, the Excel version. I don't know if that is useful to folks because it lets you sort, and I like to sort. So we'll make sure, Brent, I don't think did you send out an Excel version?
No.
We'll make sure to get an Excel version out, just so I find it a little bit more accessible by being able to sort by particular columns. So we'll make sure we get that out to you, and that will also make that, I hope, for some folks, more usable.
All right, looks like Ken's got a question.
Two unrelated questions. First, is there a reason that the Harney Basin Fund for domestic wells was not integrated with the statewide one that you successfully launched earlier this month? It seems like that would be a reasonable add-on. And I noticed on the chart that it's basically on hold for the Harney Basin. The second question is, who is the contact for the ARPA funding for fish passage? Being on the fish passage task force, I'd like to have a conversation with them on how we could make sure that's well integrated with fish passage program at ODF&W.
Who wants to handle the Harney question?
I think Kim's got her hand up. She
Yeah,
might be able to.
I'm
Kim?
happy to follow on, but. I'm sure
Yeah, Kim, do you want to respond to the Harney question?
Yeah, I can actually respond to both. This is Kim Fritz Ogrim. I manage the planning, collaboration, and investment section at the department. The Harney Domestic Well Remediation Fund is separate from the statewide fund, and we've kept it that way because the statute requirements are separate. But now with the statewide well fund launched and some lessons learned from that, and bringing on a new well fund coordinator in July, we'll be able to move towards drawing on the lessons from the statewide fund and launching the separate Harney specific well fund.
And Kim, before you move off of that one, is my recollection correct? Is currently folks in Harney can apply to the statewide fund?
Yes.
Okay, so that was one of the rationales behind launching the statewide first, is because it would be accessible to everybody.
Yes, that is correct. And then in terms of the contact for the fish passage funding, the best contacts are, there's actually two of us right now. Myself, though I'll be going on parental leave later in July, and then Adair Muth. So the best, I'll drop in the chat the email that's the best way to reach both of us. We like to have multiple people, for when those periods and different folks are on leave.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks for the questions, Ken. So let's go to the next slide, which I think I've already covered in terms of closing thoughts. But again, we're excited to have the resources that we have. We understand there's a significant responsibility associated with this. We're doing the best we can to stand up these programs and get the people and the boots on the ground that we need to be successful. We value the conversations with you because you're helping us learn as we go. But we also want you to be aware because these, we want to be able to continue these resources over time. Most of the investments that we have were not one-time investments. They're ones that we hope will be long-term. And the real benefits of the work will take time to develop. So we hope that you stay tuned. We hope that you understand the importance of these investments, and we hope that we can partner with you to continue to move down this path over the long term. So with that, maybe we could get off the PowerPoint and open it up to see if there are other questions.
Might I add one update?
Yeah.
So Danielle unfortunately was not able to be here this morning. She may drop in a little bit later, but I did want to provide some really good news. Oh, I see she is on. I did want to provide some really good news, which is that we have accepted offers for the 2 water policy positions. Some of you have been very interested in those positions and progress on those. And the great news is they have accepted. We're very excited about the folks that we're bringing on board. However, their start dates are not until, I believe it's August 15th and September 1st. So it's a little bit a ways out there. Both are coming from out of state. So wanted to provide that update because I know some of you were particularly interested in Division 10 rulemaking among some of the other rulemakings. And we really need those staff to be able to move forward a lot of this work in the policy section. Danielle, do you have anything to add on that front, or did I cover it all correctly?
I covered it perfectly, and we are very excited to have them coming from out of state, but both have water experience from different perspectives. So they will be filling a gap, and at least on my team. So I'm excited about that. So looking forward to introducing them when they get here.
Great. All right, it looks like Peggy has her hand up.
Oh, I didn't want to leave this meeting without, first of all, thanking all of the staff for all of the work you have continued to do to keep us up to date on everything that's going on. And then I wanted to remind all of us that there will be a significant number of new legislators, plus the new governor. And that's why it's really important that we are clear in our messaging and make sure that we explain things. And that's why I brought up the limited duration versus permanent, to make sure that legislators understand that a limited duration position, if it was significantly helpful in accomplishing a task, is why it's needed, and that we don't want to just put great big numbers on a screen saying, oh, we have these many new people, or we need to have that many more new people, because in fact they may not be new people. And they may be doing a task that we've asked them to do, and we just need to get them to be maybe a more permanent position. So I just really want to make sure that everybody remembers that we are going to have a big job ahead of all of us as we support the department in its work to make sure that legislators coming forward understand the work of this agency. Thank you.
So I want to flag this if you have specific questions, comments on projects in particular that you're looking at on the tracking sheet. This is a great time to ask. We have a lot of department staff on. So any burning questions, this is a good opportunity.
Hey, Bryn, this is Keelan Barter. I apologize. I'm driving and having a hard time raising my hand, but I'll just jump in and ask about Director Byler mentioned, I believe, the water budget work and mentioned that there have been some delays there. I'm curious about that funding and whether there's any constraints on when that work needs to be started or finished, and how that might be informing work that the department is doing going forward.
Kaylin, I'll attempt that one, and I'll see if anybody else wants to chime in. My recollection on that funding was that it did not have time constraints on it. So I think we're okay on that front. But I would check to see if anybody else has a different opinion on that, because I am drawing from a while back in my memory bank.
I think Rachel's got her hand up. She might be able to help out.
Rachel?
Yeah, thanks, Raquel. I'll just say from the OpenET component of that work, we believe we have adequate funding across our various funding sources to continue to do the work under House Bill 2018.
And Rachel, I guess you bring up a good point. My recollection now that I keep forgetting that OpenET was in that package. I believe that one is the one piece of it that was not permanent funding. Is that correct? Or was that one-time funding, or was that ongoing funding? I don't recall now.
I want to defer to Lisa Snyder on that.
Okay.
House Bill 2018 is ongoing funding for OpenET and water budgets.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate that. So what I'm gathering, correct me if I'm wrong, is that there is funding that will survive the end of the biennium, and that this important work, even though it's been delayed more than we would have expected, is going to get its feet and move forward. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, I believe so. Thank you. We've got another hand.
All right, Genevieve.
Hi, everyone. This is Jen Hubert with the Deschutes River Conservancy, and I'm sitting in for Kate. She had another meeting. And I just wanted to make a comment on, I noticed that the Deschutes Springs is really low on the list, which I understand it's a regional program, but it's also something, understanding the springs and the Deschutes Basin is also something that's very important to understanding our groundwater and its impacts on our rivers. And this also relates to our groundwater mitigation program. And it's consistently brought up in our reports to the commission, or in the reports to the commission. And so I just wanted to just make sure that that stays on people's radar, that might be something that should be looked at in the future if it doesn't make it through this time.
Thank you for those comments. And one thing that I think we alluded to, but I'll say it again, is I like to think about the agency request budget is the menu, and really ensuring that we get policy option packages on that menu is really the important starting point. And as we know, as we go through the process, the governor's office as well as the legislature often chooses from that menu. And not everything will get funded that's on the menu, right? Is in when you go to a restaurant, you don't eat all of the food on the menu, you choose portions of it, right? Unless you're having a really good night, I guess. But and then also it's important to be mindful of is that depending on the priorities of the governor and the legislature, we could see, packages that are lower on the list get funded than packages higher on our list. So I do think it's important from our standpoint in terms of communicating the needs that the agency has and what we could accomplish with resources and what we're not doing because we don't have the resources. That's really the importance of the agency request budget. So Jen, everything that is on this list is important from the agency's perspective, and I appreciate you bringing that up from the Deschutes standpoint.
Thank you for that.
Any other questions, comments before we wrap up? This could be budget, LC, project related, anything and everything. All right. So with that, it looks like we're running out of steam here. So we'll wrap up more than an hour early. Thank you all for all of your support and engagement over the last 6 months on this and thus far. We look forward to working with all of you further on budget and legislative stuff and into the session. This is our first of what I presume will be many hybrid meetings. So we would like to know how we did and how we can improve. So in the agenda, there is a link to a post-meeting survey. I will also be sure to send it out to everyone as a follow-up email after, but we'd really like to know really sort of how we did on all fronts. For those of you who are on Zoom, how did those of us in the room sound? How did the visuals look for those of us in the room? Likewise, so just getting some feedback as to how we can make these meetings run a little more smoothly and how we can better facilitate engagement in a hybrid setting. So I'll be sure to get that out to folks in addition to the other information that both Raquel and Tom mentioned. I'll be sure to circulate. And then I've received several requests for the PowerPoint. So I will get that saved as a PDF and posted to our website, and I'll also get that emailed out to everyone as well. With that, I don't have anything else for you. Any WRD staff have any closing comments or thoughts before we end the recording and wrap the meeting up?
Just a thanks to everyone. Special extra credit to Mary Ann for being here.
The only one.
The only one. Very brave of her. But thanks everyone, and look forward to, hope you have a great summer going forward, and we look forward to next time we get together in whatever shape and form that may be.
All right, with that, thank you everyone so much, and have a great day and rest of your week.